Hi, Anessa. This is Nigel Jaquith. I'm a reporter at Willamette Week. With me is Lucas Manfield, another reporter. We're a little bit unsure if your opponent is joining. He had some scheduling issues, so let's give him a couple of minutes, if you don't mind, to see if he's going to join us. In the meantime, just factually, so we have our facts straight, could you tell us how old you will be as of next Wednesday?
As of next Wednesday, yes, 34.
All right, great. Sorry, we put all the candidates' ages in the story. We're not just asking you. We're asking.
I was gonna say.
No, everybody, facts. People want to know how old is my rep, how old is my senator, that sort of thing. So.
For sure. And thank you for being flexible also.
Sure. All right, it's 10:05. He's not here, so let's proceed. If you wouldn't mind, if you would start by giving us a brief bio. Tell us where you're from, how you got to where you are now, how you make your living, why you're running for this office, all those kinds of details, please.
Do you want to know my dietary restrictions also?
No, we do want you to tell us, for the benefit of people watching this later on video, which district and your party affiliation, and just briefly describe the geography of the district, which towns it includes.
Sure thing. Do you want me just to lead into all of those questions?
Yeah, sure. I'm
Okay.
Baba.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, good morning, and thank you for having me here and being so flexible. My name is Vanessa Hartman. I am a mother to 2 daughters that are 8 and 11. I am currently a Gladstone City Councilor and serve as the secretary for the League of Oregon Cities People of Color Caucus. And for my actual paid job, I am the Clackamas County Chapter Director for Unite Oregon, which is a statewide community-based organization. I was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, and we moved around a lot. My stepfather at the time was in the Marines. Once they separated, it was just my mom and I against the world. We stayed in Southern California mostly. And once I graduated high school, I went straight into culinary school. Immediately fell in love with that fast-paced, sort of long hours, toxic environment. And it was really challenging work, but I just absolutely fell in love with that industry, with the hospitality industry. I worked my way up from server to manager to catering director over the span of about 12 years, mostly working in fine dining, large catering companies, and business dining was the end. I was the catering director for Intel for a little while. As my children started to go to elementary school, I did a little shift over to hotel sales for Marriott right before the pandemic hit. And so when COVID hit, I lost my 13, 14-year long career, very specific degree in catering, and watched it just sort of spiral down the drain. And when COVID hit, it was the first time I was really able to look inwards and reevaluate. What am I doing with my life? I was 30 and I was like, what am I going to do? What am I going to continue to do? This is the world that I've known, but now it is seemingly coming to an end. How am I going to take my skills and succeed in a different profession? And so I dove into community. I like to say that I was raised by community. My mom was a single mom for most of my life. And without those in community, I don't know if I would be here today. So I had a lot of support from neighbors and just people who were not, family. When that all happened, I was really reminded of my upbringing and the struggles that my mom faced, that we had faced, the barriers that she had to break down. And so with that, I started attending council meetings, because they were accessible and online. I ran for council and was successful. And immediately with that experience, saw this opportunity to bring that sense of community and mutual aid to all levels of government. And you want to just fast forward to now. I'm running for House District 40, which is Gladstone, Oregon City, Jennings Lodge, parts of unincorporated Clackamas County, and Johnson City. And I am running because I truly believe that we need an elected leader that deeply understands the everyday struggles working families face. How do we address and access affordable and quality education and childcare? How do we fight for affordable, inclusive healthcare options? You'll often hear me say that I was a urgent care kid. We did not have access to healthcare growing up. And, for me, basically deserve politicians that fight for our most basic needs. And so now I'm here sitting with you today.
That's great. When did you win your seat on the Gladstone City Council?
In 2020.
Okay. What has that experience taught you so far?
Ooh, that experience, it has been one of the most rewarding and painful and growth experiences of my life. I think the biggest thing that I can say that it has taught me is how do we work together when there are disagreements? As I'm sure you're aware, the divisiveness in the country also affects small cities like Gladstone. And how do we get back to having really constructive conversations, agreeing to disagree? And, if that gets to the place, how do we still respect each other and come back that we're really elected to serve the community and keep our residents safe and a welcoming environment? And that part has been a big part of my growth is learning how to work with all different types of views and people. And all of that experience comes from working in food and beverage. You're constantly, being told one thing and then this thing. And so really using those skills of those people skills of how we can get to the middle and really work together.
Mm-hmm. Prior to you explained the changes in your career. Prior to your running for council, what was your community engagement, civic engagement?
So my civic engagement before running for council, well, I guess we'll say pre-pandemic, was limited because I'm a working mom. I had 2 small kids, get up, go to daycare, go to work, come home, and repeat all over again. So there was minimal interaction in that sense, just because I had to simply pay the bills, and it was work, kids, and that's just sort of how it was before.
Okay. This seat is currently held by Representative Mark Meek, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so, and he's running for the Senate, which means it's an open seat. So
Mhm.
how did you come to this election? Were you recruited by the party? Did you say, hey, Meek's stepping up or trying to step up, I'll step in? What was the process?
I feel like it would have been easier if it was that, but no. So when I first became elected, it was about 6 months in. I had some great mentorship, and it was, one person was like, if this is the path you want to go, you need to figure out which path. Right now there's different paths you can go. Do you want to be mayor one day? Do you want to go into the county, or do you want to go to the state level? And so I did some really deep digging into what path I wanted to go. And the House side was always something that I came back to, where I felt like I could make some really great impact for these smaller cities. And so I always had that in the back of my mind. And then when Representative Meek announced that he was moving, I just took that, not to be cliche, just as a sign. The door is opening, and I'm learning to take those moments and really hold on to them. And so after doing, I would say, about a month of research, I really wanted to really 100% have the support of my family, the support of my community, and making sure that I could still be a great mom, and also be a great representative. And so after talking to a few different folks who are parents in the legislature and kind of hearing how they did it, we came to the conclusion to just go for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went for it.
Okay. We saw in the past 6 months, 3 Democratic representatives, Karin Power, Anna Williams, and I forget who the third was, but all relatively new representatives. Karin Power has been around for a while, but they all sort of said, hey, we can't make this work. We've got families, we've got very small paychecks, and we've got very large demands on our time. I'm just curious, everybody's life is different, but did that give you pause when those 3 representatives said we can't make this work?
It absolutely gave me pause. I personally, if I was a single parent, could not survive off of $33,000 and support my children. It gave me pause, but then with continued encouragement to keep pushing forward and to fight for that the fair pay. But I would be lying if I said it didn't give me a little bit of oh my gosh. But I think that what we are doing now is important to keep fighting forward. I made this decision, and I'm going to keep fighting, and keep fighting for that pay.
So a lot of people are drawn to the legislature through advocacy work or through a specific issue that is extremely important to them. You've mentioned a number, but I'm wondering what single issue or policy area that you would be most drawn to if you're elected.
That is a great question because I have named a lot. We have been out on the doors. I mean, I've been campaigning for 10 months. And so I have my personal priorities of affordable and accessible childcare. That is something that is near and dear to my heart, something that I would love to see become universal publicly funded childcare system, because it really can address some of the shortcomings that working families have to face, whether they choose to take a job or not, because you're paying $2,200 for your child to go to daycare or childcare, full time. That is my core focus. But I will say, as a new candidate, a new person in this, I am very aware and mindful that while I have my priorities, I do want to leave space for what we are hearing on the doors, what we are hearing from the constituents. And I would say, probably one of the top three issues that we are constantly hearing is being proactive about homelessness. That, cities, we've experienced it here in Gladstone. We are not set up to succeed to actually provide the services for folks that are experiencing homelessness. And so that in its way is becoming the priority because that is what we're hearing on the doors. That and addressing the shortcomings of Measure 110. I know you said you only wanted one or one, but that and addressing the shortcomings of Measure 110, those both are becoming much more of a discussion in the community, and that would lend my want to represent them in that way to really address those things.
What role do you envision the legislature might have in terms of addressing the concerns that people have about Measure 110?
I know, it's for me, the Measure 10 rollout, it took too long, in my opinion. Getting the funding, getting that, setting up our local jurisdictions to succeed, having that funding to ensure a positive path for expungement. I really want to see the state, or what I would bring, I will speak for myself, is making sure that there's a plan in place for when we make these sort of measures or these bills, because far too often you see something like this and it on paper looks great, and then when it comes to the rollout, it fails. And so making sure that we are thinking about steps, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and really working hand in hand with the county and the cities to make sure that they're set up to succeed.
Okay. One of the things that we always hope for in candidates is that they will go to Salem and think for themselves and be independent and be willing to work with anybody if policy is a good policy and important regardless of party labels. So I know you've only been in office for a couple of years, but you've had a lot of life experience. I'm wondering if you can point to a place where you've demonstrated independence, and in this case, it would be independence from the sort of the Democratic Party line. No offense to Democrats, but there's a lockstep issue at times where everybody thinks and does the same thing. So can you tell us about a way in which you either act independently or think independently from your party?
That's a good question, and I would say it's hard for me to answer because my only role has been a nonpartisan role, and I've taken that to heart in the council work that I have done. Is really not is really listening. I answer to my constituents. I don't answer to the party that I'm registered as, and so throughout the time frame of my council work, it has been with that lens of really wanting to focus on community engagement and really wanting to collaborate and hear from the residents on what their opinion is on whatever policy we're trying to pass. I would say one that comes to mind where it was a collaborative moment and there was a lot of discussion around it is here in Gladstone. We recently started charging a parking fee to go into one of our largest parks, Meldrum Bar. Very contentious conversation. And with that, some of our nonprofit sports teams, the soccer, softball, and baseball, we're seeing a lot of impact from that because of the traveling teams that were coming into play had to now pay for parking. And so there was a lot of, one side was like, yes, more money. Other side is like, no, we can't charge for this. And so really trying to find common ground. I advocated to have several listening sessions to hear from those teams so that they could have input, so that we could hear from the people who are actually affected by this policy that we were trying to pass. And in the end, we came to an agreement. Maybe not 100% of people were happy, but in the end, we had a good majority of folks who were in agreement as to the why we need to start charging for that.
Okay. You mentioned early in our conversation, that there's been a lot of contentiousness in Gladstone. We're aware of some of that. I want to ask you about an issue that's probably quite contentious in Gladstone. That's Measure 114, which would establish a new requirement for gun buyers. It makes the permitting and licensure for gun ownership more rigorous, and it restricts the number of bullets that you can have in a magazine to 10. Are you familiar with that measure?
I am familiar with it, yes. It is not something that has come up in discussion on the door, as people are asking questions. And as we get closer, people are starting to, okay, now we do this research. So it's not something that we have been discussing in terms of whether or not I support it or don't support it. I myself have read up on it a little bit, and I know that it seemingly does seem to impact historically marginalized groups. While I do support having these additional background checks and all of these things, I need to do a little bit more research on how me personally would do that, and also what my community believes.
So you don't have a position on it. You couldn't say whether you're going to vote for it or against it at this point.
At this moment, I wouldn't feel comfortable answering yes or no.
Okay. Tell us how you think about guns and gun control more generally then.
This is the hot topic question. So as I stated earlier, I was a military kid. I grew up with a stepfather who was in the Marines. He served his time in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so I grew up around the notion of gun safety. I knew that they were in the house. I knew that we had them. I knew that I wasn't allowed to touch them, and I understood and respected these things not as toys. They're not something to be played with. And I feel like that's a little bit lost now. I am in full support of increasing our background checks and raising the age requirements. I think that we do need to have some additional protections so that we can keep our community safe. With that being said, I think we also need to be focusing on the mental health of the individuals who typically we see, and making sure that we have proper funding and resources to help them with that and mitigate that problem before they get access to deadly weapons. So yeah.
Okay. Tolling is a hot button issue in many parts of Clackamas County. Tell us what you're thinking about the potential for tolls on I-205 and I-5, particularly as they relate to your District 40.
Absolutely. This has been probably the number one conversation, even before I decided to run. And I would say, as a city councilor, we've spent about 22 months, well, for me, 22 months, hearing from individuals, hearing from other elected officials that are very much in disagreement. And I think if there's one thing that's going to bring our communities together, or one thing that we can all agree on, regardless of party line, is that this tolling is going to have huge impact, whether it's on low-income families or the expansion of the freeway, of those neighborhoods. And my biggest concern is the infrastructure of the district that I hope to represent. Oregon City and Gladstone are going to be the thoroughways that people get off the freeway and come through. And our infrastructure is just not set up right now to take that on. And so if for some reason we are unsuccessful with pulling the tolling back, I want to make sure that it is an absolute equitable process, and that there is clear and concise information that people can access, and that the funding that is created from this stays within the areas that is most affected by tolling. We don't have safe sidewalks for when people are getting off the freeway. We don't have the stoplights, and we will need to work together. We will need ODOT to commit to funding to stay within the areas that are most affected, because we are not prepared for the impact that this tolling is going to have on this area.
So the candidates from West Linn, when they were in, really focused hard on diversion, and it sounds like that's really your concern as well, that people, rather than pay the toll, will jump off 205 onto Gladstone city streets and to McLaughlin probably. And
right.
So what is ODOT telling you in terms of their readiness or ability to do something about that diversion?
There has been no communication about that yet.
Have you asked, has the Gladstone City Council asked ODOT for
yes
permission?
So I want to say, if my memory serves me right, there is a letter that we all signed. I want to say that the C4 team also, all of the mayors in the area, also signed, and it really is just about getting that information and getting some commitment. Right now, it still very much feels like we're getting the beginning stages of community engagement without collaboration from the cities to actually provide input in. And so I think we all are very much still fighting to get our representation and our voices into this planning process. But it does very much seem like a closed decision on how these things will continue. So I hope that they're able to listen to us at some point.
So if you listen to environmental groups, they will point to the fact that transportation is the biggest source of carbon emissions in this state, and that the only way to really make progress on our climate goals is to encourage people to either drive electric cars, which are expensive, or drive less, which is inconvenient. And from a big picture point of view, it feels like, you know, we keep passing local ordinances and state laws that commit us to aggressive reduction in carbon emissions, but when we start actually talking about how that might happen, as with congestion pricing on the two biggest freeways, or two of the biggest freeways in the area, people are like, no, that's inconvenient for me. That's going to cause some disruption in my life, so I'm a no. And we, you know, it's not the first time we see this issue where ideals and reality collide, and people are like, well, reality is more important than ideals. So this is a long-winded question, but as legislator, one of the most difficult tasks you'll have is to try and reconcile two competing demands. And here's the demand for climate.
Right.
We're doing something about climate, and the demand from your would-be constituents to not ruin their lives with diversion from 205. So help us understand that. Is climate important? Is climate change important to you? And if so, how are you kind of reconciling these two things?
I think it's I love the way you framed it, because it just is a everyday battle sometimes when you are having two things that are on paper look really great, you know, but like you just said, you framed it perfectly. The reality is sometimes not always, you know, can always be successful. I think with my experience of managing various types of views and bringing together, I have at least seen through this process that lack of communication, that lack of understanding, that lack of intentionally bringing these voices to the table to really come up with a plan that, fingers crossed, can hopefully suffice. My issue with, you know, some of the things that you were saying is that we are not thinking about the impacts of our low income families. Like you said, I can't afford an electric car. I can't afford to put solar panels on my house. I would love to, but it's not something that I can afford. Mm-hmm. And so how do we make these decisions that it really is going to affect and positively affect everyone, not just the wealthy who can afford it, while also listening to their voices. And for me, you know, climate change, you know, at this point, I hope that everyone should be acknowledging that it's here and that it's real. You know, we've seen it with the ice storms, we've seen it with the heat dome, and you know, all of these, the wildfires. So for me, it is just about making sure that I'm committed to listening to all sides, but then ultimately doing what is right for the whole state of Oregon, what is going to be financially stable for low-income families, and how do we come together to attack this issue of climate change, because it is real, but it is needed to be every single person needs to be involved to move us forward and really make some change.
All right, Lucas, any questions?
Yeah, we talked about homelessness a little bit, but what is your if you were to put forward a proposal at the state level, what would it be?
Yeah, that's homelessness is it is a huge issue, and very much a point of contention when it comes to discussing with our constituents here. There is not one beautiful answer, as much as we would love there to be, that will solve just one thing. And I think for me, coming from working at community-based organizations, we really have this model of wrapping around the individual, or this holistic model is what we would say, where we're not just addressing, oh, this person needs a bed for the night. We're addressing the root cause of how they got to this place, whether it was, mental illness, whether it's an addiction issue, whether it is that their rent was increasing and they no longer can afford to pay that rent and they were evicted. We really want to understand and try to get to the root cause and then wrap around the individual. And so for me, from a city level, this county, Clackamas County, does not have the resources, enough resources to actually help these individuals. We had an experience here in Gladstone recently, an individual who was living on the streets. We were able to give her the vouchers. Our police force did a wonderful job of the restorative justice that they're supposed to be doing, and they helped her pass along, and now she was on a waiting list. And I've heard that story many times from folks that while they get the resource and they get that housing voucher, or they get the option, and then they're on a wait list for affordable housing. And so for me, it would be focusing on that issue of the amount of affordable housing that we have, and how do we speed up the process? How do we support the workforce to actually get these people that are experiencing houselessness off the streets permanently, and not just increase shelter beds, not just increase those things, but really find a common ground on how we increase our affordable housing.
I think that pretty much covers it.
Great, okay. Last question for all candidates, not just for you, is if the world were to end tonight and you could only eat or drink one thing before the world ended, what would that one thing be?
Oh, that's funny. Can I have like courses? I'm kidding.
You only get one.
Yeah. I am a sucker for a good bowl of ramen. It is my comfort food. It just warms my soul. And so I guess I would want to be really comfortable when the world is ending. So that's probably what I would do. And I'll add a drink. I probably would have, probably a really good old fashioned.
Great answer. Well, listen, thanks for taking the time to talk with us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you both. Stay safe out there.
Bye-bye.